Hello to everyone. My name is Sandeep. I am working as assistant professor in the Department of Information Technology of MLR Institute of Technology, Hyderabad. In previous class, we discussed the constructor and then object. How can we delete that object attributes and how we can delete that objects, as well as the types of constructors. What is that? That is parameterized constructor, default constructor, and when these default constructor will be included by the Python virtual machine, as well as constructors at when that constructor will be executed. So these all the things we discussed about the constructors as well as the self variable, right? And now we have that instance variables are some type of variables in Python, right? So here we are going to discuss the types of variables, the instance variables, and declaring that instance variables. First, the types of variables, right? First of all, what is that variable means? A variable represents the memory address. For example, a equals to 10. Okay, no? A equals to 10. So whenever that a equals to 10 means the 10 value is stored at somewhere. I don't know that address, but somewhere it is stored the 10 value in the memory. For example, if I want to access or if I want to perform some operation on this data, that is data is 10 here, then how can I access, right? So that's why we required some address. That address represents where that data is stored, right? That here address represents variable. What we can say? Variable. So that's why variable represents what? The memory location or the memory address of the value, right? So this is about what? Variable. And in Python class we have the three types of variables. One is instance variable, second one is static variable, and third one is local variable, right? Now see, first we'll discuss about that instance variable. So it is very fundamental concept. Of course we have that in every programming languages. If you take the Java programming language, even though we have that instance variables, but here somewhat is different, but the concept is same. Okay, the concept is same. What is that concept means? That value of the variable is differ from object to object. For example, this is the t1 object. So in this t1 object, that instance variable value might be 10, and for example this is the t2 object of the same class. Okay, na? T1 object and T2 object belongs to the same class, but here that instance variable is what? Value a is 10, and here the instance variable value is 20. So like that one, if the value of the variable is differ from object to object, see here from T1 object to T2 object, that instance variables a are different. Here the in T1 object that instance variable a equals to 10, and in T2 object that instance variable a equals to 20. So this variable is called instance variable. That means if the value of the variable is differed from object to object, then such a type of variable is called instance variable. Such a type of variables is called instance variables, right? So how that object to object that instance variables will be differed means, because of for every object a separate copy of instance variables will be created. How this statement will be achieved means, because that every object, for example for this object, that instance variable, a separate memory or a separate copy of instance variables will be created. That means for every object a separate memory represented to the instance variables, or a separate memory will be created to the instance variables. So that's why that value of the variable is varied from object to object. These two statements are connectivity, right? Next, they are variables that belong to a specific instance or object of a class. Yes, that instance variables is also known as object level variables. Okay, na? That instance variables is also known as object level variables. Why? Means because of that variables belongs to that object of a class. That variables are going to specifically, we can say, object of a class. That's why instance variables is also known as object level variables. Next, instance variables stores the state of an object and can be accessed, modified through the object itself. That means that instance variable values can modified and can also be accessed and also can be created. How it is possible means by using an object. By using an object, we can create that instance variables, as well as we can access that instance variables. We can modify that instance variables. So that is about what? Instance variables. Next, how to declare that instance variables? So we can declare that instance variables in some different places. The first one here is inside constructor. What? Using self variable. We can declare the instance variable inside the constructor. See, we can declare the instance variables inside the constructor using self keyword. Okay, now using self keyword. And once object creates, automatically that variables will be added to the object. For example, say def underscore double underscore init double underscore self. Okay, and then a comma b. Now self dot a equals to a and self dot b equals to b. This is the instance variables. This is the instance variables. So inside the constructor, how can we declare the instance variables? Using self variable. So by using the self variable, we define the constructors. See, a and b are instance variables, right? Now that instance variables automatically add to this object. Okay, now object of that class, to the object of that class, right? Now see an example. For example, here see, there is a class that is student class and one constructor is created and this constructor is parameterized constructor. How can we say? Because this parameterized constructor having more than what? One parameter other than the self parameter, having two more parameters. One is name, age. So here we are going to define that instance variables. We are defining that instance variables using the self keyword, right? Inside the constructor, whatever the variables are defined using self keyword, that variables is called instance variables. And these instance variables having that values through these constructor arguments, right? Now see here, at the time of object creation, we pass the values. So then we are going to print, and like this second object, for second object the value is changed, right? Let me see an example. Before that one, this is here two objects are there. Okay, now how many objects are there? Two objects. So for example, S1 object and S2 object. For S1 object, name is there, instance variable, and age. For S2 object, name is also there and age, right? So name for the first object, in the first object, the instance variable name is, for example, Ravi, and in the first object that instance variable age is, for example, 20. Similarly, but coming to the second object, that name and age might be there, but values will be different. See here, name equals to Ramu and age equals to, for example, 22, right? So variables is same, but this object and this object having different values. That means for S1 object and S2 object having the same variables but different values. That variables is called instance variables. That variables is called instance variables. Now see, so class test def underscore init self a comma b. Self a comma b. Now self dot next b, right? So this is what instance variable. Same thing inside the constructor, a b c are what instance variables. Self dot a, self dot b and self dot c are what instance variables. See, same program, right? But here name and age are there, but there is what different values. Okay, now see, right, we are going to create an object 10 . So here there is no variable c, right? So here the object is created. Now print, okay, now object t, okay, now see print t dot a, what we can say t dot a. Next print t dot b, print t dot b. So here how many objects I created? Only one object. For example, I will keep as t1. So now I save this program. So 10, 20. Okay. Next, for example, I going to create one more object. Now I pass the values 30, 40. Now what will be happen? Now see. Object 2. Right? Object 2. So here we did not open the double quotations. Now print t2 dot a equals to 40. Okay, print, we are going to, or we can say, sorry, t2 dot a simply. Next print t2 dot b. So let me run this program. We'll get see different values. So object to object, that instance variables are differ or not. Why? Because of for every object a separate copy of the variable will be created to the instance variables. A separate copy will be created to the instance variables. So this is the program, right? So here how many objects are there? 2 objects, but these 2 objects having different values or not? Yes or no? So object to object, that instance variable, sir, object to object, that variable value is changed or not? So that that variables is called instance variables. Okay, so that is about what? Declaring and accessing that instance variables, right? Next, one more way we can declare that instance variables inside instance method using self variable. Okay, na? Inside instance method using self variable. So we can declare that instance variables inside the instance method using self variable. We can declare instance variables inside instance method using self keyword. If any instance variable declared inside instance method, then that instance variable will be added will be added to the object automatically when we call that method. Okay, no? When we call that method. So whenever we call that method, automatically at that time that instance variables will be applicable to that object. to the object. Okay. Now see, there is a class. What is the class name here? Student and constructor. Into this constructor, two instance variables are defined. Next, M1 method. So this M1 method also define what? One variable, that is C variable, right? Now see, an example, right? So class test no def self, okay, no double underscore. What is this one? Constructor, right? So self a comma b, a comma b. So the constructor here, right? The constructor, into this constructor, what is this constructor? Parameterized constructor. So this parameterized constructor, into this one, how many variables we pass other than the self variable, that is a, b. Now we are going to assign that value. Next, self dot b equals to b, right? Self dot b equals to b. Now we are going to define a method, that is inside instance method. Also we can define the instance variables by using self keyword, okay, na? By using the self keyword, right? So in this way we can define the instance variable inside the instance method and inside the constructor, right? Now see, all these three variables added to the object automatically, okay, na? All these three variables added the objects automatically. See, that instance variables will be added once we call that method. Initially, whenever the object is created, these two variables will be added to the object, like that one, a, b. Whenever this method is executed, then the C variable will be added to the object. Okay, I will show you that one. Now object is created, right? Now I am calling that M1 method and I am going to call that object through this one. Now see, all A, B, C variables will be added to the object T, right? So here test, what is that error? Yeah, T dot M1 method, see, type error, what is that one? Double underscore in missing that relative positional arguments. Yes, here we did not pass that values, right? So 10 comma 20, right? So that's why it is got error. Now see, what will be happen? Now all these three variables are added to the object or not? Which object? Object T. Yes or no? Right? See, first A and B variable is an instance variables which is declared inside the constructor, and that C variable is also instance variable which is declared inside the instance method. So whenever an object is executed, these two variables will be automatically added to the object T. Similarly, whenever the method is called, then that C variable is also added to the object T. That's why it all comes under one object. That object is T. Okay, na? That object is T. Like that one. For example, A equals to 10, B equals to 20, C equals to 20, so 30, like that one. So this is the important statement. Whenever we call that method, instance method, then that instance variables will be added to the object, right? So that is the thing about declaring that instance variables inside the instance method. So inside the constructor, we can define the or declare that instance variables using self keyword, as well as we can declare the instance variables inside the instance method using the self keyword, right? So up to now we discussed two things or two ways we can define or declare that instance variables. Now there is another way we can declare that instance variable, or there is another place we can say that declare the instance variables, where means outside of the class by using object reference variable. Okay na? Outside of the class by using object reference variable. So we can also add the instance variables outside of a class to that object. So let me see an example, right? So class test, so def double underscore in it double underscore self a comma b. Now self dot a equals to a, next self dot b equals to b, right? So now def double underscore m1 method, right? And we have, this is the instance method. Into this instance method, once again declaring that instance variable and value is 30. Now object is created. Now at the time of object creation we have to pass the values. Now after them, by using that object, I am calling that m1 method, then a, b, c are added to the object. Now one more variable I am going to declare, that is instance, one more instance variable I am going to declare, which is outside of the class. How can we declare that instance variable which is outside of the class? Means by using object reference variable. Here the object reference variable is t and the instance variable name is d. Now the 40. Now we'll check that all variables a, b, c, d, which is the instance variables added to the object are not, right? Double underscore dict double underscore. Now let me see by running this program. See, all the instance variables are added to that object. Which object? Object t. That's why it comes under one object. A equals to 10, b equals to 20, c equals to 30 and d equals to 40, right? Like this one. A equals to 10, b equals to 20, c equals to 30, d equals to 40, right? So this is about what? Declaring the instance variables. Next, very important. When you change the instance variables of one object, okay, one object, then the changes will not be reflected in the remaining objects. Why? Because every object maintains a separate copy of the instance variable. See, for example, there is two objects, t1 object and t2 object. Here the variable a equals to 10 and here the variable a equals to 20. For example, by using t1 object, if I am going to change the value of the variable a, now that value will be updated only in t1 object, not in t2 object. Okay, that value will be updated only in t1 object, not in t2 object. That means if you modify the value of instance variable using object, then that value will be updated in that object only, not reflected in other object. Why? Because of, for every object maintains a separate copy of instance variable. That means for this object a separate copy of instance variables will be maintained, and here for this object a separate copy will be maintained. So that is that's why whenever you change the instance variables of one object or by using one object, then that value or that updated value will not be reflected or modified in other object. So let me see an example, right? So class test. Now def double underscore I in it double underscore. So we have to give some, right? So self a comma b. Now self dot a equals to a, self dot b equals to b. Okay, now see, I'm going to create an object. So for example, t1 object, now 10 comma 20. Now print object 1, right? So by using that object, I'm going to call that instance variables t dot b. Now see, what is this object level instance variable values now, right? So what is that error, syntax error? So yeah, here self a comma b, right? So 10 comma 20, so no need that space, object 1, and we have to keep in double quotations because of it is has to be represented in the string format. So that's why it is got error. Okay, now see, what is that one? Name error. So sorry, here that object, that instance variables is called t, but actually here the object name is t1. So t1 dot a and t1 dot b. So that is that error, right? So now what will be happen? Object 1 contains variable, object 1 instance variable value contains 10, 20, right? Next, now one more object I am going to create, t2 equals to test. So 30 comma 40. Now print object 2, right? Now print t2 dot a. Next, print t2 dot b. Okay, now see what will be happen. So object to object, that instance variable values is different or not? Here the instance variables is a and b, and here also the instance variables a and b, but object to object, what is that one? That instance variable values will be differ. Why? Because of for every object a separate copy will be maintained for the instance variables. So that is the right important statement. Next, how can we access the instance variables, right? We can access the instance variables in two ways. One is, if you want to access the instance variable within the class, then you can use the self keyword. Or if you are going to access the instance variable from outside of the class, then use the object reference. Okay, na? Object reference. So let me give an example for this one, right? So class test, now def, right? So double underscore in it double underscore self a comma b. Okay, a comma b. Now self dot a equals to a. Next, self dot b equals to b. Now see, def m1, and then this is the instance method. Now self dot c equals to 30 and self dot d equals to 40. Now I'm going to access these instance variables within the class. So if you are going to access the instance variables within the class, then what will be happen? You can use the self keyword. See, by using the self keyword, I am accessing that instance variables. For example, if I want to access that instance variables, then we have to use object reference variable. That means if you want to access the instance variables from outside of the class, then use that object reference variable, right? So t dot a, so print t dot b, and then we are going to call the m1 method. Right now, see, all values will be printed. So 10, 20, 30, 40. So that means if you want to access the instance variables inside the class, then use the self keyword, or if you want to access the instance variable from outside of the class, then use the object reference variable. Next, there is another way, that is get attribute method. So this is the get attribute method. Okay. So by using the get attribute method, we can access what? That instance variables. We can access the instance variables, right? Now let me run this example. So class test. See, if you observe here, from where we are going to access that instance variables? Outside of the class. Okay, outside of the class we are accessing for by using which method? Get attribute method. Okay, get attribute method, right? Now see, def double underscore init double underscore self a comma b, right? Now self dot a equals to a. Next, self dot b equals to b. Right now, I am going to create an object. So passing the values. Now print get attribute method. Okay, na? See here, what is that attribute? What is the method name here? Get attribute, ATTR method, right? So now see, for example, if I am going to access the directly like this one, if I access directly like this one, see, we'll get what? An error, because of compulsory we have to pass an object. Compulsory we have to pass an object. See here, okay? Now see, so get ATTR, and then what is the object? T within the quotations A. Now we'll check this output. What is happened? So get attribute method, right? So what is that one? Yeah. So here is student and then age. So the same thing here also. Yeah. So spelling is mistaken, right? Now we'll get the output 10. The same scenario here for accessing the instance variable b, right? So object and then passing the variable within the quotation. Now see, 10, 20. So by using the get attribute method, we can access the instance variables. Okay, so two ways we can access the instance variables. So one is, if you want to access within the class, then you can use the self keyword, or if you want to access the outside of the class, then you can use the object reference variable. And another way here is get attribute method. So finally here is, we cannot add an instance variable to a class from outside, right? Why? Because of that instance variables belongs to an object. So that's why we cannot add an instance variable to a class. Next, adding an instance variable to one object will not be reflected to the remaining objects. Already we seen an example about this statement. Why? Because of for every object a separate copy of an instance variable will be maintained. Next, we can also delete an instance variables from the object. Okay, no? We can delete that instance variable from the object by using, what is that one? A del keyboard. See here, we are deleting that one, right? So in this way we can delete that instance variables as well as access that instance variables and declare that instance variables, right? So what is an instance variables we discuss, and declaring that instance variables, accessing the instance variables and deleting that instance variables from an object. So this is about instance variables. In next class we'll discuss about what another type of variable. Thank you.